this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is actually the first part of Part 5, Golden Wind. Or Vento Ario if you want to get fancy, because that's technically the name of the part. Vento Ario is Italian for Golden Wind. So David Productions just kind of changed it to be in English, so it's Golden Wind. So yeah, depending on which version of the story you're following, it's either in its original Italian name or its English name. I'm going to call it Golden Wind for convenience because I am not Italian. But yeah, the entire thing, as it's implied, is actually set in Italy, and we actually do meet our protagonist for Part 5 in this episode as well. So it starts off with a young man dressed in pink. He's going through the streets of Naples, Italy, where he's apparently from. And where he lives. And as he's going through the streets, we actually learn that so the narrator describes Naples as this beautiful touristy location that everybody should visit at least once. But as we find out from this new character's point of view, I'm being a little bit coy, but from this new character's point of view, we actually find out that things aren't so nice and cheery. As it turns out, there is a deep criminal underbelly, and that's full of corrupt cops, drug dealers, and a whole bunch of other things related to that. So yeah, while Naples on the surface is a very pretty location, and you should absolutely visit it, as the narrator describes. In actuality, it's a crime-filled cesspit. So yeah, as the man in pink actually walks through, and he actually is the protagonist, but I'll get to actually his name in a minute, because it's revealed in halfway through this episode, oddly enough. But as we're going through the streets, the pink suited man is actually approached by a couple of girls who are trying to figure out directions, and he kindly points them in the right direction. But as he's talking to them, a pickpocket actually tries to make off with one of the girls' wallets without her noticing, and the man catches the pickpocket and swipes the wallet from him before he can, and then gives it back to the girl, who then thanks him, and then they go on their merry way. But not before something interesting happens. As it turns out, and is very much implied and later revealed, This pink wearing man, he's a stand user. We don't see what his stand actually is until later, but rest assured, we do eventually figure out what it is. But as we find out, he uses his ability to turn two of her banknotes into butterflies, which he then turns back into banknotes, and the girl is completely none the wiser. And with that, he then proceeds to go and buy himself an ice cream, but sees that a kid is actually crying because he can't actually afford an ice cream, so he buys the second one using the money he stole. So this kind of sets up a bit of a duality with his character. One, obviously he's a good guy it's kind of a duality with the character. He's a good guy, but he has no qualms with stealing and the like, if he has to. And obviously this isn't the first time he does it, because he actually does it again immediately after the scene. So shortly after the scene, we're actually introduced to an unlicensed taxi driver who's trying to fleece a couple of tourists out of their money, and are actually approached by a guy named Luca, nicknamed Leaky Eye Luca, and as we find out later, because as we find out later, his eye is messed up. He got, according to our main character, who eventually does explain it later. The reason the guy's eye is the guy's nicknamed Leaky Eye Luca, because his eye is always leaking because of a fight he got into. It damaged his tear duct, which caught in his right eye, which causes it to leak. But in case Luca then approaches the taxi driver and tells him that he hasn't been paying his protection money. and it's revealing that this guy's actually a part of the mob. And he starts beating the guy up, telling him that he needs to pay his dues or for protection, or he can't continue to do his job. At which point the taxi driver reveals that he's actually not the only one skipping on protection payments, and reveals another man, Giorno Giovanna, has actually been skipping on his payments as well. And while Luca does realize that he'll need to pay this Giorno a visit, he realizes he can do it later, and then proceeds to continue teaching the taxi driver a lesson. As it turns out, though, Giorno Giovanna is the name of our protagonist. And is in fact the guy Licky Eye Luca is looking for, and is in fact the guy in the pink suit and with the weird looking hair. But in case, as we find out that reveal, we're actually reintroduced to Koichi. As we established in my review of Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan, Koichi was actually planning to go on a trip to Italy. And he actually asked Rohan to actually teach him Italian using Heaven's Door, it's revealed that we've actually find out the purpose of that trip in this episode. So, as it turns out, Koichi has just arrived in Italy, and he had Rohan teach him Italian, which he later reveals, but we already know that Rohan actually did that, but it's revealed that he actually went on a trip to Italy to investigate a man named Haruno Shirobara, but he realizes that he'll have a much better chance of actually finding this Shirobara person once he's actually checked into a hotel and dropped off his baggage. And sure enough is looking for a taxi driver to actually take him to the hotel. At which point he's approached by Giorno, who notices that Koichi seems to be looking for a taxi to take him. But as Giorno reveals his prices, as Giorno reveals his price, and as Koichi later kind of tries to calculate, his prices are apparently way too high, and Koichi decides to take his chances with the actual taxi driver line. At which point, Giorno notices that Koichi seems to know the Italian language pretty well, and Koichi begins to explain that Rohan taught him Italian using Heaven's Door, but decides against it, pointing out that it would sound very weird if he actually said that. At which point, Giorno decides to lower his prices, which Koichi then realizes is only like 500 yen. It's 10,000 whatever the currency is in Italy, but I don't know the Italian currency, but it's 10,000, of whatever that is, which translates to 500 yen, and Koichi realizes he can more than afford that, Giorno points out that since he's not taking a tip, that Koichi will have to load his own baggage. At which point Koichi proceeds to get into the taxi, but doesn't really let his guard up, pointing out and even tells Giorno outright that if he tries to do anything shady, that he shouldn't underestimate him, because there's more to Koichi than meets the eye. And that Giorno shouldn't underestimate him as a naive tourist, and that he should just kind of that he shouldn't be so worried about actually trying to fleece Koichi. But sure enough, Giorno does indeed trick Koichi. He asks Koichi to put his bag in the front seat, and then when Koichi goes to get into the back seat, Giorno proceeds to drive off without Koichi in the car. At which point Koichi summons Echoes Act 3 and proceeds to pin the car down so that he can actually get his stuff back and actually corner Giorno. Giorno, realizing that he's in serious trouble, tries to run off. And Koichi realizes that he wasn't actually able to get any information out of Giorno, and as to why he tried to fleece him. But also notices that in that brief period of time, his bag has actually gone missing somehow. So Koichi has no idea what actually happened to his bag. All he knows is that it's gone, and in its place is a frog. So Koichi then proceeds to panic because he realizes that his bag is missing and that it had all of his money and passport and other stuff in it. So he then proceeds to panic and also realizes that he actually needs a lead on Giorno to actually figure it out. And sure enough, finds out that some cops are actually talking about Giorno and explains that he's actually half Japanese and that he might actually, and which catches Koichi's interest, and then proceeds to talk up the cops to try and figure out what exactly is up with Giorno Giovanna. At which point Giorno is waiting for something, which we do find out later, and he's actually approached by Leaky Eye Luca, who then proceeds to bring him into the airport, into a side lot near the airport, and asks Giorno to sit down, at which point Giorno explains that he knows who Leaky Eye Luca is, and then proceeds to explain the fuller details of the story, which I kind of glossed over earlier, but long story short, Luca took a knife to the eye. It messed up his tear duct, and now he can't stop crying out of that one eye. But in any case, Giorno then proceeds to sit down, and Luca just kind of lays out the law for him, pointing out that there are three U's you don't violate in friendship, and that's that you don't lie, you don't skip out on your protection money, and whatever the third one is. And then points out that Giorno has actually been skimping on protection money and that he hasn't paid it yet, so he actually does need to pay Luca some money. But as Giorno actually confesses, he actually already paid his protection money, so he actually doesn't have anything to give Luca. But Luca points out that Giorno paid off the cops, which doesn't really count. So at which point he swipes Giorno's wallet and opens it up, only to discover a picture of Dio in it. And I'll get to that in a minute, because it's actually very interesting. But as Luca is actually opening up the wallet and realizing that there's actually no money in it, he then proceeds to shout at Giorno that he needs to pay his money or pay the consequences. At which point the frog from Giorno's cab actually shows up and starts climbing on him. And Giorno is a little bit surprised that the frog actually came back to him. And Luca tells Giorno that he needs to knock the frog off of him because they're trying to do it in negotiation. But Giorno defends against the frog, pointing out that it's just a sentient creature with its own life and that it really shouldn't be killed or knocked off or anything like that. At which point Luca decides to take matters into his own hands after getting frustrated with Giorno's in unwillingness to actually shake the frog off of himself, and then proceeds to attack him with his shovel that he carries around. Only for Giorno to reveal that was actually a mistake. At which point, Luca's shovel actually attacks himself and caves in his skull. And it's revealed that Koichi's missing bag is actually the frog, and that at some point Giorno actually turned his bag into a frog, and then proceeds to grab the frog after it turns back into a suitcase. It's a very complicated situation, but keep on with it. But in any case, during this entire sequence, we actually find out a little bit more about Giorno. He apparently has the Joestar birthmark, which means he's a Joestar. So, yeah, that should tell you. So, yeah, he is indeed our main protagonist. He is indeed a Joestar, but interestingly enough, he also has a connection to Dio, and also seems to showcase several of his mannerisms as well. Case in point, after Luca is defeated by his own shovel and knocked out, Giorno then proceeds to leave, but also tells Luca that he doesn't like explaining himself, pointing out that it's useless, and that he doesn't like doing things that are useless, and then proceeds to walk off. So yeah, useless is kind of Dio's catchphrase, and Giorno is exhibiting that catchphrase as well. So it's a very interesting situation. But as we find out from a flashback, the reason Koichi is actually in Italy is because Jotaro told him to, basically. Jojo, long story short, asked him to investigate into Haruno Shirobara, because he actually wants to investigate Haruno's skin. Pointing out that he needs to see if there's anything weird about it, and tells Koichi that he actually needs to go and investigate that for him because he needs somebody he can trust on that. And Koichi agrees, but before he gets ready to go to his trip, which Jotaro agrees to foot the bill for, he also remarks that the man in the picture actually looks a little bit like Jotaro. So, at which point it then flashes back to the present day where Koichi is still trying to figure out where this Haruno Shiobara is based on the directions that Jotaro gave him on his map. And is trying to investigate, but is also worried that he'll run into Giorno again, pointing out that he actually does need to find him so that he can get his stuff back. At which point he actually walks by a cafe and points out that he does and when the man notices that he seems to be hungry because his stomach growls, he tries to offer him some food, but Koichi declines, mainly because he doesn't have any money because it all got stolen. But as it turns out, as luck would have it, he actually runs into Giorno at the cafe. Giorno is actually using Koichi's money to actually pay for his food. And is actually being harassed by several girls who are pointing out just how cool he is. At which point Koichi confronts Giorno and demands that he give Koichi his stuff back. But Giorno declines, mainly because he actually stole Koichi's stuff, and Koichi is a little bit understandably annoyed by that. And when Giorno tries to run away and escape, telling Koichi not to follow him, Koichi once again summons Echo Zack 3 and pins Giorno's money hand down with Echo Zack 3's freeze. So yeah, because of that, Giorno then proceeds to hit the ground and is unable to actually get up and move. At which point Giorno realizes that Koichi is indeed like him, as he puts it. And points out that and realizes that his malfunction with the taxi wasn't a malfunction at all. So Giorno, realizing that he's actually just like Koichi, actually summons his own stand, Gold Experience, who we finally actually see in this episode. And sure enough, Gold Experience shows itself to be pretty powerful. It creates a tree which enables Giorno actually to get out of range of Echo's 3 freeze. And Koichi realizing that Giorno couldn't have gone far, then proceeds to chase after him, but can't. As Echo Zack 3 actually reports back, they can't. It seems that Giorno has actually escaped. But then they look up and realize that Giorno has actually escaped into the tree that I mentioned. And Giorno tells Koichi not to come after him anymore. But Koichi decides not to listen and attacks the tree with Echo Zack 3, only to suddenly get pinned down by his own 3 freeze. So Giorno points out that reminds him that it would have been useless to actually do that, and then reconfesses that he will leave Koichi alone from now on, though, since he notices that Koichi seems to have a gentle soul and he doesn't want to bother Koichi again. So he decides to leave and escape onto a building rooftop from the tree that he created. At which point Koichi decides to call up Jotaro and inform him of the situation. So Koichi just kind of recaps everything that happened about how he found out that Haruno Shiobara is actually Giorno Giovanna, and about how, as he quickly realized, Giorno is indeed a stand user, and which does confirm Jotaro's suspicions about who he is. But he also admits that Giorno used to have black hair, but it turned blonde for some strange reason, and nobody's entirely sure why. And Jotaro does posit a theory that it was around that it was most likely the result of his trigger for Gold Experience to become activated. So he concludes that Giorno is actually. So he concludes that Giorno most likely gained his blonde hair because of his stand. At which point Koichi points out that Jotaro seems to have some sort of history with Giorno and wonders what's going on. At which point Jotaro picks up his picture of the gang from Stardust Crusaders and remarks that he actually killed Giorno's father, and reveals that Giorno is actually the son of Dio. And Koichi, knowing full well that Dio was a very bad dude, now realizes why Jotaro prioritized trying to find him, pointing out that Giorno actually likely gained his stand abilities because of his blood relation to Dio, but as Jotaro actually points out, Dio's vampire body could very well have manifested on Giorno. So if Giorno is either enemy, can either be an enemy or a help or a hero, and it's a crapshoot as to which is which, because he could have gotten his genetics from either Dio or Jonathan, because as has been established up to this point, Dio stole Jonathan's body, so he could easily be the seed of one or both of them. He could easily be both their sons at the same time, or one or the other. He could easily just be Dio's son, and D could just literally just take after his dad. And considering that Giorno is a stand user, he could definitely be particularly dangerous if it is indeed the latter, which is why he's asking Koichi to look into him. But in case with this entire exposition out of the way, Jiro then proceeds to get on a subway, and is about to actually go and leave and go to a new location, when he's suddenly approached by a man on the subway. The man doesn't introduce himself right away, but he does introduce himself at the end of the episode, and I'll get to that. But the man then sits down and asks Giorno a couple of questions, stating that pointing out that saying what Giorno would do if he actually found a suitcase of 1 million yen laying on the ground, having picked up a little coin and actually stuffing it in his pocket beforehand. And Giorno admits that he would absolutely take it, no questions asked. But then the man actually asks him what would happen if he was an ununiformed police officer, and Giorno decided to confess all of that. And Giorno admits that he would actually give it 50-50 if that wasn't indeed the case. And the man actually concludes that Giorno isn't lying, pointing out that Giorno that he is actually really good at telling, that because he can tell based on the sweat that Giorno would produce if he was lying, and also states that he can actually tell by tasting his sweat, but notices that Giorno isn't actually lying because he's not sweating. At which point he also proceeds to ask several questions of Giorno about Licky Luca, and what happened to him. And Giorno becomes increasingly suspicious of this man, once again wondering if he's indeed a cop. But the man confesses that he is not, and that he's just looking into it because he was a friend of Luca. But Giorno denies ever actually meeting Licky Luca at all. So the man leaves. And Giorno thinks he's in the clear until, mysteriously out of nowhere, he had his fist clenched the whole time, but for whatever reason, an eyeball suddenly appears in Giorno's fist, and he has no idea where it came from. And from his suspicions, he quickly deduces that it is actually Luca's eyeball. And then the man comes back and concludes it by poking his head through the window of the subway car and actually licking Giorno's face, pointing out that it is actually the taste of a liar. And also I'll get to that in a minute. Never mind. But as Giorno realizes that he's in trouble because now this man actually knows that Giorno lied about not actually meeting Licky Luca, he then proceeds to come back into the subway car and continues to question Giorno about what actually happened between him and Licky Luca, pointing out that they actually found that Licky Luca was actually unconscious and isn't giving up, and was actually disposed of by their boss. And tells Giorno that he'll actually continue to actually torture Giorno, pointing out that the interrogation has officially begun. At which point Giorno then cuffs up Licky Luca's fingers, which freaks Giorno out, and after some debulation, he actually figures out that this man is also like him and is also a stand user. At which point, the man proceeds to use his ability, confessing that he can actually make whatever he wants appear inside Giorno's mouth, and then proceeds to punch him with his stand, which we only get a brief glimpse of. We don't really fully get to see what it looks like, but he punches Giorno, and where he punched Giorno, a zipper actually appears on Giorno's face, which is all the evidence Giorno needs to actually conclude that this man is indeed a stand user. And the man finally introduces himself as Bruno Burchiardi, who is indeed a member of a mob, who is indeed working for a mob boss, and has come to interrogate Giorno and figure out what happened to Licky Luca. And Giorno, realizing that he needs to actually defeat Bruno to actually defend himself, summons his own Stan Gold experience to actually defend himself. So yeah, this first episode does a really good job of setting up what kind of character Giorno is going to be. So Oh, so first and foremost, the mystery of who Giorno is the driving plot of this episode. Obviously, we eventually find out who he is and that he's actually the person that Koichi was looking for, but more to the point, it's revealed in this episode that not only is he a stand user, and the mystery of how he actually became a stand user is actually going to be a thing going into the series, but, on top of that, he's actually apparently the son of Dio, and Jotaro, knowing full well that Dio was very dangerous, back for when he was still alive, wants to find Giorno as soon as possible to make sure that he isn't indeed a threat like his old man was. So, yeah, it is a very interesting setup for a series. And also, I should mention this. So, yeah, the whole bit of Bruno licking Giorno's face, not only did that quickly become a meme, but the MatPat actually looked into it a little bit and concluded that it is indeed possible for him to taste a lie, but it's about as accurate as a real lie detector. So, which is to say, not very. But yeah, that is kind of just funny to me that this is actually, that licking people's face to actually tell if they're lying or not is actually backed up by real world science. So, yeah, it's not the first thing that this series has done that's actually backed up by real world logic, but it's weird that this, of all things, is actually possible. It's weird that scene, of all things, is actually possible in the real world. But in any case, yeah, this episode does set up who Giorno is, sets up that he does seem to have a bit of a duality going on, where he is indeed a good guy, but isn't above stealing. And also establishes that he isn't very, that he's a very nuanced character. Obviously, he's a good guy, but he's not afraid to steal from people. And also the mystery of who he is going to be a thing going into this season. So, and also now he has his first official stand battle against Bruno Bucciardi. So, we're going to be seeing how that actually plays out going into the future. But for right now, that's my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. I post a bunch of updates and stuff over there, so be sure to go check those out. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. It's only a couple bucks a month. It helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check those out in the description below as well. And also, I will list you on my website if you do that, so go check that out. I also write written reviews over there, but go check both of those out in the description. Also, if you want to help further support me, be sure to go check out my Twitch channel down in the description below. Zack Morris Does Twitch. I stream every Sunday over there, 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm currently working out how to make it a bit more low latency so I can actually play games for you guys again, because my internet's terrible, and apparently the fix I thought was a fix didn't actually fix anything, so I had to figure out another way of actually doing it. So I'm trying to make my streams as low latency as possible so I can actually stream for you guys again. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one, whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to see more of what you like, or check something out that's new, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But regardless of whether or not you any or all those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!